I call the Honourable Jenny Salesa.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity to speak on the third reading of the Taxation, Neutralising, Base Erosion and Profit Sharing Bill. Madam Speaker, this is a bill to avoid tax avoidance by multinational companies. But before I do speak on this bill, Madam Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the work that the previous government did on this legislation. They started this work, and I want to especially acknowledge the Honourable Judith Collins, who then handed it on, and I want to thank and acknowledge the Honourable Stuart Nash, who finalised this work. And Madam Speaker, one of the things that was stated earlier on this evening, which I really agree with, is the fact that there is love and peace in this House and Parliament as we're talking about this bill. It's not very often that we have unanimous agreement to a bill, but to have love and peace on a taxation bill is indeed unique. Madam Speaker, this bill has been designed to ensure equity of taxation where multinational enterprises are concerned. We welcome the operation of multinational corporations and companies in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Madam Speaker. They often bring goods and services to our country. But when they do come, when these multinationals come and they operate here in Aotearoa, they do benefit from a lot of our public services, our public roads, our telecommunications, our infrastructure. And with that, it is only fair that they pay their fair share of tax whilst operating here in our country. Madam Speaker, on the 6th of December last year, this bill was introduced by our government, and one of the main purposes of this particular bill, as I said, following on from the work of the previous government, is to protect Aotearoa New Zealand's tax base from erosion through abuse of tax system. There is a concern around the world, Madam Speaker, about the aggressive tax practices often used by multinationals either to pay no taxes at all or to pay as little tax as possible anywhere around the world. Now, many of these multinationals are operating in New Zealand and they are compliant with our legislations. However, for those that are not compliant, the reason why we are introducing this particular bill is to ensure that these strategies that minimises their obligations for tax purposes are actually addressed. This bill is designed to ensure fairness for New Zealanders in terms of multinational tax corporations. And Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Taxation, Neutralising, Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Bill, third reading.
Call on Government Order of the Day number 3.
Overseas investment